For centuries, one empire had known nothing but expansion. Its armies marched relentlessly, swallowing continents. Cities fell, kingdoms vanished. From the sands of the Middle East to the forests of Eastern Europe, its banners symbolized an unstoppable force. A tide of conquest that no one had been able to turn back. By the late 17th century, this empire stood at the very gates of Central Europe, a behemoth casting a long shadow over the continent. Only one city stood between it and total dominance. That city was Vienna. Imagine for a moment what the capture of Vienna would have meant. It wasn't just about taking another piece of land. It was about seizing the heart of Europe. The trade routes that crisscrossed the continent would fall under its control. The political landscape would be shattered and remade. Strategic supremacy would be absolute. This was not just another battle in a long line of conquests. This was the moment that would define the empire's future, the final crowning achievement of its centuries-long ambition. In the summer of 1683, the great Ottoman army marched west. Confidence was high, and for good reason. This was a massive, experienced fighting force, an army that carried the weight and prestige of centuries of victory. When they arrived, the city of Vienna was swiftly surrounded. Its defenses were strained, its resources dwindling. To any outside observer, its fate seemed utterly sealed. The city was a mouse trapped by a lion. But then, within the opulent tents of the Ottoman command, a critical decision was made. A fateful one. Instead of launching an immediate, overwhelming, and decisive assault to crush the city's defenses in one swift blow, the Ottoman leadership chose a different path. They chose patience. They believed time was their greatest ally. The city would starve. Its defenders' morale would crumble. Resistance would collapse from within. All they had to do was wait. And so they waited. The summer sun beat down on the siege lines. Days bled into weeks. The initial skirmishes and bombardments gave way to a tense, grinding stalemate. The Ottoman commanders watched the city walls, confident that with each passing day, victory drew nearer without the need for a costly, bloody assault. They were so sure of their strategy, so convinced of their own strength and the enemy's weakness. But while the Ottomans waited, Europe was not idle. A sense of panic, but also of resolve, was spreading across the continent. This wasn't just Vienna's fight, it was Europe's. A grand coalition, a holy league, began to form. Messages were sent by desperate riders. Pledges were made. Armies from across the German states, from Austria, and most crucially from Poland, began to mobilize. They started marching toward Vienna, their shared goal chillingly simple: break the siege or lose Europe forever. The fundamental mistake the Ottoman leadership made was one of imagination. They completely underestimated the speed, the coordination, and the sheer will of their enemies. In their minds, it was impossible for any significant relief force to assemble and arrive in time. The logistical challenges were too great. The political divisions among the European states were too deep. They were wrong, terribly wrong. The morning of September 12, 1683, dawned. From the Kollenberg Heights, the hills overlooking Vienna, and the sprawling Ottoman camp, the Allied forces appeared. The sight must have been breathtaking for the besieged and horrifying for the besiegers. An entire army, ready for battle, had materialized as if from nowhere. The Ottomans were caught completely off guard. Their forces were stretched thin, organized for a long siege, not a pitched battle. Their best troops were in the trenches, not arrayed for a fight in the open field. The battle began with a massive artillery barrage from the coalition forces, pounding the Ottoman positions. Then came the infantry assault, a slow, grinding push down the slopes. But the decisive moment, the one that would be immortalized in history, was yet to come. In the late afternoon, King John III Sobieski of Poland gave the order. The Polish cavalry, the famed winged hussars, began their charge. Imagine thousands of armored horsemen with large wings of feathers attached to their backs, thundering down the hillside. It was one of the largest and certainly one of the most spectacular cavalry charges in all of history. They slammed into the Ottoman lines like a thunderbolt. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical one. Panic ripped through the Ottoman ranks. Order and discipline, the hallmarks of their army, evaporated in an instant. Command structures collapsed. What had seemed like an inevitable, patiently awaited victory just hours before had turned into a sudden, catastrophic defeat. The Ottoman army broke. They fled, abandoning their camp, their supplies, their artillery, and their grand ambitions. The Siege of Vienna was over. The immediate consequence was the salvation of the city, but the long-term effects were far more profound. This was more than just a single lost battle. For the first time in generations, the Ottoman Empire was not advancing. It was in full retreat. The myth of its invincibility was shattered, not just for the Europeans, but perhaps for the Ottomans themselves. Across Europe, the powers that had trembled before the empire now sensed weakness. They saw an opportunity. A series of wars followed in the coming years. Territory that had been held for centuries was lost. The momentum that had carried the empire forward for so long was gone, replaced by a desperate struggle to hold on to what it already had. The Ottoman Empire would, of course, survive for 2 more centuries. It remained a major power, but it would never again threaten the heart of Europe. It would never again stand at the gates of Vienna. This singular event wasn't the final fall of the Ottoman Empire. It was something more subtle and perhaps more dangerous. It was the moment it stopped growing. Empires don't always collapse in a single, fiery cataclysm. Sometimes their end begins quietly. It begins when the world, and they themselves, realize they can be stopped. And for one of the greatest empires in history, that realization, that long, slow decline, began with a single, fateful decision made outside the walls of Vienna. The decision to wait. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. See you next time.